at Vice. I started at Vice in February of 2015. And Vice is, I don't know if you've all read Vice before or seen the videos, but basically, in a nutshell, Vice is a youth media organization. It started in Montreal in the 80s, 90s, but now its headquarters are in Brooklyn, in New York, and there's a Toronto office that in 2015 really exploded because Rogers Media and Vice came together in this partnership. Rogers was going to give Vice $100 million to make a TV channel called Viceland. And so at that point, I started in February. I work in TV production. So I was one of the first people on the TV side to get hired. And at that point, there were, I would say, 40 permanent staff. And over the next 6 months, it exploded up to about 200 staff. We moved into this big fancy new office, and it was all very exciting. It was this very exciting time at Vice. And
fancy office.
there it is. That's Manisha. Anyway, so that was our office. And in many ways, it was like very exciting to work there. There was tons of work being done that was really trying to push the envelope. And I mean, I work in documentary TV, and it's not often that documentaries are aimed at people under 30. And so it was really fun to get on all that. But at the same time, there was sort of this feeling that $100 million being spent, and yet a lot of us felt like we were being underpaid. There was a lot of growth, but everything felt really disorganized, and there was really poor communication with the staff. A lot of people were being hired on these short-term contracts, and it didn't feel fair that some people were getting paid well and with benefits, and some people were just sort of like working week to week. And so it all felt really disorganized for the workers, and really kind of all haphazard. And it also really felt like your experience working there really depended on who your particular manager was. It wasn't like there was a set of rules that applied to everyone. It was like if you had a good relationship with your manager, everything was going to be okay. But if you didn't, then maybe it would be a little less of an enjoyable work experience. So come the fall, like I sort of remember it, I got involved sort of in November. A different group of, a smaller group of organizers had approached the CMG a few weeks or maybe months before I heard about it. And so they'd started meetings. They'd met with the CMG to bring them. CMG is Canadian Media Guild. They're a big media union in Toronto, but they have offices in all over Canada. And so I got involved in about November. I went to this very clandestine meeting. There was like secret notes being passed, like come to the meeting tonight. This is a union meeting. And I was very intrigued, but didn't really know what to expect. And Kat was there with her colleague Katherine, and they sort of told us a bit about what it means to form a union. But what was really valuable about that meeting, I would say there was about a dozen of us there from all different departments. And we just sort of started talking about maybe concerns we had. And it suddenly became clear that, it wasn't just, I felt like I was being underpaid, but I felt maybe like I just hadn't negotiated hard enough, or I hadn't stood up for myself. But then you realize that literally everyone feels the same way, and like everyone is having the same concerns about transparency, and everyone's having concerns about vacation time and overtime and all of this stuff. And suddenly you realize I'm not the problem here. The problem is that, the place is growing too fast, and management, it didn't feel like they had our backs. And so it became clear that one way to try to correct this was to join together and to form a union. And that was November 2015. And then it was a very long, drawn out process until I think it was June 2016 when we finally had the vote. And so in that whole process, it was this, like Lise was saying, it was this very hard, challenging process of trying to convince people to sign cards. And it's this physical card that all of us who are organizers took a little pile of cards, and you go to people and you say, would you sign this card to say that you want to form a union? Or at least you want to have a vote to form a union, because signing a card doesn't count as your vote. Signing a card means you're interested, and then after that, then we vote. And so it's scary as an employee to put your name on something and sign it because, of course, the rule is that your manager never finds out the names on these cards. It's confidential, like super confidential. But you're still putting your name on it and you're signing it and you're handing it over to this union organizer who you kind of know from work, but maybe you don't know them that well. And so it's this long process of trying to build trust with your coworkers that you're doing this because you want all of us to have power and you want all of us to be more happy at our jobs and to get more out of our work. And so that takes a long, long time. And also, like you mentioned, it can be hard to figure out how many people work there. That was a huge challenge at Vice because, first of all, there's offices in Toronto and Montreal, and there are some employees elsewhere too. Like there was one person in Vancouver. Plus, there's this concept that some people are full-time permanent staff, but some people are just on contract, and some people are temporary, and some people are freelance. And so there was all of these different kinds of employment, and we had to figure out, do those people count? When you're trying to reach that 40% threshold, who counts as part of that 40%? Who counts as management? Right? Like even that was tricky to figure out because Vice would say, oh, this person's a manager, when really they were paid really well, but they actually had no managerial powers.
Or maybe they even have manager in the title. Like you can be manager of whatever, of like
some logistics,
food.
Yeah.
And anyway, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was this very complicated process where we had to be confident that we had enough cards that, first of all, if we, sent them to the labor board, we would qualify. And also that we would have confidence that if there was a vote, it would pass. And so we spent a lot of time trying to make lists of all of the employees and trying to find colleagues who were on board, who could then speak to their friends and their colleagues in their departments. So that took a really long time. And partly because one thing I should mention about the Vice Union that started right from the beginning was one thing that was important to us as workers, and I think also at the CMG, was that the union cover the whole office. Oftentimes in media, or really in many different industries, a union will cover like just the journalists, right? Like just the writers and the editors. But for us, because Vice is this wide-ranging media organization, there are writers and editors, but there's also this TV channel. So there were video producers and production managers and production coordinators and PAs. And then there's a marketing department. And then there's this in-house ad agency. And there's, all of these different departments. IT, everyone. And so it was important to us that we were all working together. We were all in this together. And so we wanted the union to include everyone. And so that meant those of us in video production had to make friends with people in IT and had to make friends with people in marketing so that we could talk to each other as colleagues and try to get everyone to sign cards. So that took a really long time, a really long time. But it worked. And we got enough cards that triggered a vote. And the vote was in, I don't remember, May 20.
Yeah, end of May? 2016.
2016, June.
It was long.
It was June 2016.
Yeah.
And it passed with like 65%. But the lead up to that is really stressful and very difficult and challenging. I think you were talking about, management making efforts, anti-union efforts. They did a pretty good job of making it seem like they weren't being anti-union. They tried to act cool. It was very Vice. So they would sent out an email basically being like, we think it's really cool to work here. We don't think you need a union, but vote your heart. That was their big thing because I really think management didn't think it was a threat. I really, truly believe they don't think that it was going to pass at all. And I remember before Christmas, there was this big town hall, or maybe it was just after Christmas, whatever. There was this big town hall and they said, we think it's great that you can work here, and we think it's a great place to be, and lots of people want to work here, so you should basically be grateful. And there were all sorts of problems that they weren't acknowledging. There was this, they made sort of vague attempts to fix things. But in the meantime, The US office had unionized. The UK office was trying to unionize. BuzzFeed in the US, I think, Gawker had unionized. And we were thinking, like, the time is now. This is happening. We all, behind closed doors, we talk to each other and we're like, we need more collective power. So we were able to convince each other that this was the right move, and management was just totally unable to convince us otherwise. For a while, I really believed that if they just offered everyone a $1,000 raise and an extra week vacation, they probably would have won the vote. But they were just, even that, it never occurred to them. I really don't think they thought it was a threat. They just kept saying, just vote your heart and, the right thing will happen. And then 65% of people voted to unionize.
And they did, there's the whole, sorry.
Yeah, no, go.
Thing where management can sometimes be your best, asset in organizing, can help you because, they sent out this email too, if you remember, I think the one you were talking about where they're it's great to work here and, remember all the benefits that you get and, vacation and health benefits. But really, that was only for the permanent employees, not for contract employees. So they, made the case to all the contract employees, oh, yeah, you are being screwed over. And,
yes.
It was just funny.
It was,
To the disorganization of the whole organization. And, they didn't even know, probably, that they had so many contract employees that weren't getting the same treatment.
They totally didn't. And then I think one key sort of example was on the actual vote day. So it was a very exciting day, but you were saying, most Ontario workplaces are provincially, in provincial jurisdiction. But we were trying to make the case that we were actually federal jurisdiction because you'd mentioned broadcasters count as federal. And though Vice wasn't the TV broadcaster, Rogers was, we made the argument that because all of our work is online and so much of our audience is digital, that Vice should count as a digital broadcaster. And it was, I think, the first of its kind, the first people to make this case. And so on vote day, the decision hadn't been made yet about what jurisdiction we were under. So there was a table of 2 people representing the Ontario Labour Board, another table of 2 people representing the Canadian Labour Board, and then 2 people from management, and then 2 people from the union. And everyone had a list, and everyone had ballots, and it was hilarious. People would come in, employees would come in to vote, and they'd come to the table, management table, and say, oh, my name is, Maggie McCaw. And they'd be scouring the list, trying to find you. Meanwhile, Kat and the other people from the union were like, oh yeah, hi. And we knew everyone's name. We knew every department that they worked in. And it suddenly became so clear that we knew the workplace so much better than they did. We'd really done a lot of legwork, making sure that everything happened and making sure that the vote passed. And it did. So that's sort of creating the union. And then from there, it was the long drawn out process of bargaining and trying to actually get our first collective agreement, which then took another year. I think it was May 1st, 2017, that we actually ratified the first collective agreement. So it's a long process.
This was very much one of the first organizing drives in digital media. It was just Gawker and Vice US, I think, were the 2 main ones that you mentioned right before. That was enough to get Maggie and her colleagues okay, this is something that could happen. Actually, unions are for people like us as well. But since then, there's been 60 organizing drives in digital media, both in our union here in Canada, and then we're part of a broader international union, which is the Communication Workers of America. So just over half of those have been within our union, either in Canada or the US, or with the Writers Guild of America East. Doesn't really matter. That won't be on the test, so don't worry. But and so that has meant about 4,000 media workers have joined unions in the last since 2013 overall. So it's incredible. It's huge. Any argument about unions not being relevant in the media or in new, white collar, professional creative industries is that's not a legitimate argument to make because of just the sheer numbers. Yeah. There was just 1,500 people joining our union in the last year alone. Mostly in the U.S. for sure, but the unionization rate, as maybe you talked about in this class, is so much lower in the U.S. So In Canada, most media outlets are unionized already, so there's kind of less organizing to be done. But yeah, here in Canada, BuzzFeed Canada joined our union this year, and then the National Observer, which is like a small environmentally focused digital media outlet. Anyway, so it's very exciting, and I think thinking back to 2015, it was like this kind of shifting narrative where, like, a couple of things in journalism in particular, I think. One is that, like, it's all falling apart. You know, there's going to be no journalism in a few years, and there's no good jobs, and there's going to be layoffs, and there's going to be, you're going to be a freelancer, you're never going to get a permanent job, you're never going to be paid well. And I don't know, some of you are in communication, but there's no journalism.
Yeah, more than half.
About half. So I don't know, like, I've done a lot of workshops at journalism schools in particular, and you just see this, like, this is what, like, people are being told as they go through school. Like, this is it. Like, you either have the professors that are like, you're out of luck. Like, back in my day, anyone could get a job. Or, like, it's all up to you. Like, you need to build your... Sorry, no. Excluding your professor first. Or, like, you need to build your own brand. Like, it's going to be up to you. You need to get on Twitter. You need to, like, get out there, work 100-hour weeks, like, market yourself. And suddenly coming through, I mean, I'm a bit, like, exaggerating this, but, like, there was this narrative in 2015 that was, like, workers being like, wait a second, like, it can't just be this or that. There needs to be a way for us to come together and, like, change our futures and build a sustainable future in journalism, and not only one where you can, you know, earn enough money to pay the rent in expensive cities like Toronto and raise a family, pay off your student debt, and make it so that, like, it's not just people who can afford to go into journalism that get the jobs, you know, which is a big issue. But also one where workers actually have some say and control over what they get to write about, what, like, content they get to produce. And so I think those were the two, like, big, emerging kind of themes, or, like, when Gawker unionized, that was really what they were talking about, was like, wait a second, like, this whole union thing, like, we are workers just like any other worker. We do need unions because we need to democratize the workplace and make it a place that is sustainable going into the future. So yeah, it's been, like, very exciting to see that. And at that time, you know, no one had done it yet. So it was, like, a great theory, and then suddenly over the next 5 years, now there's 60 new organized workplaces in the media. And I think those are really, like, the main themes that have driven most of this organizing. Like, it's not just about, it is in some places when there is, like, especially the inequity between workers, like, that it is about pay, it is about benefits, but it's also really fundamentally about those, like, broader questions about what is the role of journalism in society. And I guess just on that kind of broader, like, unions in these different sectors, like, an exciting thing we've seen just in the last year or two-ish is growing, like, talk and organizing efforts in, like, in the games industry, video game industry and tech. And one cool thing that I've heard in our union, starting to do some work with workers in those industries too, and, like, the connections between those industries are really exciting. And one ripple effect, I guess, of all the organizing in media is, like, publications like now Vice Games, but it used to be Waypoint. You know, the writers have been organizing and part of these processes to, like, build power in the workplace, and so now they're covering like, in terms of relating back to the content of media too, but they're covering their, you know, the things that they write from a different angle, thinking about industry, thinking about video game workers as workers and it as an industry. And so that, I think, has helped to, like, build that interest and analysis and understanding in, as an example, games as well. And also there's similarities there in terms of, yeah, sure, it's about pay. I mean, in tech, it's not really about pay. People get paid very well. It's more those broader questions of ethics and accountability and, like, what kind of work am I being forced to work on, kind of thing. Like, in games, I'm looking at, like, ties with the military or ties with gambling and stuff like that. And so anyway, there's a lot of cool similarities across all these different kind of creative, you know, tech workplaces that haven't been a lot of worker organizing for decades, but now suddenly that's shifting. So. The best practice, what you do is you go through, so I randomly just brought one of our handbooks, which I can pass around if people want to look at, in terms of how you organize your workplace. But so what you do is you like write down every single thing that the union buster is going to say, because you know what they're going to say. They're going to threaten to close the workplace. They're going to say you're going to be forced to go on strike. They're going to talk about, like, sometimes it's outrageous, like there's going to be all these fees and there's like a union court you could be brought to, like stuff that just is totally made up. So as long as there's education done in advance to tell workers what to expect and what they're going to hear, then when this guy in a suit is brought in to like say all these things, actually this is another thing I can pass around. We even have this like anti-union bingo. So like if you're brought into a meeting, a really common tactic is like to bring everyone into a meeting, and then they bring in this union buster, or more effectively, they get your like close manager that everyone likes to do this, and they go through and tell you all these lies and misinformation. A good thing is to like be prepared and then to like use some humor to try to cut through it. So like if people have this bingo in front of them and like they're like checking off every time, the union buster says whatever one of these lies, like it's just a way to kind of diffuse the tension. But sorry, what the National Post did was a lot of like one-on-one conversations between direct managers. Like they didn't bring in like the, Paul Godfrey or whatever, like the guy who's like earning $2 million a year while everyone else's salaries and benefits are being cut. They got their like direct managers to have a one-on-one conversation with them with like veiled, like they can't threaten, they can't promise that things are going to change, or they can't promise you money, and they can't say you're going to lose your job, but they can like kind of hint like, well, maybe this workplace won't be as flexible and that kind of thing. And it can be really effective when it's like the person you work very closely with in the newsroom that's kind of, trying to sow that division. So that was a big part of it. Sorry, is there a question?
They have a website with all their career listings. It's because they have so many different sort of strands of their business. There's lots of different kinds of jobs at Vice. There's writers for the website, like the news side. There's writers for marketing. There's a lot of social media marketing. There's lots of traditional marketing, that kind of thing. And then Virtue, the agency in-house, is they do really interesting content too. They do written and content for web, but they also do a lot of video content. So I mean, there's a wide range of jobs. There's a lot of internships. Almost all the department. I haven't worked there for a year and a half, so I don't know what's happening right now. But in my time, there was a lot of internship opportunities for students and recent grads, and we paid in the collective agreement.
Okay.
They're protected under the collective agreement in some small capacity. And they actually have always been pretty good at, like, if you're an intern there and you apply for a job, they really do consider you. There have been a lot of people who've gone from intern to staff. Yeah.
And so what skill sets are they looking for?
Well, like I said, I haven't been there in a year and a half, but people who really thrived at Vice, I think, were sort of keen to learn about things that are new, like in terms of the journalistic side, stories that maybe larger organizations aren't telling, either super local or like sort of off the wall kind of ideas, a little edgier. Same with, the video and TV content they do, same thing. They try to sort of tell stories that other people maybe aren't telling. That's sort of their vibe, is sort of trying to sort of take a normal news story, but give it a bit of a slant that's aimed at a younger audience, sort of trying to say, why is this important to people who are younger? And what would get a younger person to want to read about this?